I remember the first time I met David. It wasn't love at first sight. Not exactly. But there was something about him. Something magnetic. Something I couldn't put my finger on. He had a charm. An energy that made everyone around him feel special. He listened when I spoke. He made me feel seen. And above all, he made me feel like I was the most important person in the room. That's how it started. I remember our first few months together like it was yesterday, dates that felt magical, laughter that never seemed to end, long walks under the stars where we talked about everything and nothing. We were the couple everyone envied. People would tell us how perfect we were together, how lucky we were to have found one another. I believed them. I believed that love, our love, was perfect. And then we got married. The ceremony was beautiful. The vows, the promises, the smiles, everything seemed to fall into place like a fairy tale. I was the happy bride, in love with my husband, excited for the life we were going to build together. But what no one could see, what I didn't even want to admit to myself, was that perfect love was a lie. It started small. The way David would get irritated over the tiniest things, my hair out of place, the dinner being a little too salty, a look from another man, even a comment that seemed harmless. At first, I wrote it off. He was stressed. He was tired. I didn't think much of it. He loved me, right? That's what I told myself every time he raised his voice. And then, one evening, I saw something that would change everything. We had just had dinner, and everything seemed normal. David was telling me about his day at work, as he always did. But there was a shift in his tone, something colder. His words became sharp, cutting, like daggers. I had asked him a question about his day, something simple, nothing too complicated. But it must have been the wrong question because suddenly, his face contorted with anger. "Why don't you ever listen to me?" he spat. His eyes were cold, and for the first time, I saw a side of him I didn't recognize. I froze, unsure of how to react. I could see his jaw clenched, his fists tightening. I didn't know if he was going to hit me, yell at me, or what. The silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling like I had no place to go, no escape. He saw my fear. He saw the way I shrank back, and just as quickly as the anger had come, it disappeared. He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging, and then, in the gentlest voice, he said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I'm just frustrated. It's been a long day." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that it was just stress, that it would never happen again. So, I forgave him. I brushed it off as nothing, because I didn't want to believe that our perfect love was anything but. But over time, I realized it wasn't nothing. It wasn't a what-I'm thing. The small outbursts began to happen more frequently. He would get angry at nothing, shout at me for trivial reasons, and then apologize. He would buy me flowers, promise that he would never do it again. And I would believe him. I wanted to believe him, and I did for a long time. But then, one night, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't the yelling. It wasn't the apologies. It was something much worse. David came home late, and for the first time, his usual excuses didn't make sense. He didn't offer any explanation. Instead, he walked into the room and locked the door behind him. His eyes were dark, his body tense. I could feel the fear rising in my chest, but I didn't know why. I had seen him upset before, but this time, there was something different about him, something dangerous. "I told you not to ask questions," he hissed, grabbing my wrist with a force that sent shockwaves through my body. I couldn't move. His grip was too tight, too painful. I tried to pull away, but it was no use. The man I loved, the man I had married, was no longer the person I knew. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt suffocating. My heart raced, and the tears started to fall before I could stop them. I was terrified, but I couldn't understand why. He had never hurt me physically before, but now I wasn't so sure. Was this how it would end? And then he let go of my wrist and backed away, a look of shock and guilt crossing his face. He stumbled over his words, muttering apologies and trying to explain himself. But nothing he said could take away the feeling of fear, the fear that had settled in my chest and refused to leave. In that moment, I realized that the man I married was hiding something far darker than I could ever have imagined. I had been living a lie, trapped in a love that wasn't love at all. It was control. It was manipulation. It was abuse. The next few weeks were a blur. After that night, I couldn't look at David the same way. His apologies, his promises to change, they felt hollow, like words he had said to many times before. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to leave. And part of me still couldn't believe that the man I loved, the man I had married, was capable of doing what he did. I tried to rationalize it. He was under stress. Work had been difficult. He loved me, didn't he? This wasn't like the other times. It couldn't be. He was sorry. He promised he'd never hurt me again. But the truth is, he did hurt me. And the scars weren't just physical. They were emotional. They were in the way he controlled me, in the way he manipulated my feelings, in the way he made me doubt myself. He knew what to say to make me feel guilty, to make me feel like I was the one who had caused everything to go wrong. I started to question my own sanity. Was I overreacting? Was I really just too sensitive? I felt like I was drowning. The man I had married was slipping further and further away from me, and I was too afraid to reach out for help. There were moments when I felt like I couldn't breathe, when I felt trapped, suffocated by the life we had built together. Then, one day, I woke up and realized something. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I couldn't stay for him, not anymore. I had to leave for myself, for my own sanity, for the woman I used to be, the one I had lost in the chaos of this abusive relationship. But leaving wasn't as simple as packing my bags and walking out the door. I was terrified. I was terrified of what he would do if I left, terrified of how he would react. I had seen the anger in his eyes. I had seen how he could turn into someone unrecognizable, someone capable of violence, someone capable of destroying everything in his path. He had always told me that I couldn't survive without him, and for a while, I believed him. But the truth was, I didn't need him. I wasn't weak. I spent days trying to make up my mind, trying to figure out what the right thing to do was. I talked to a friend who knew what had been happening, and she encouraged me to get help. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I had let it go on for so long, ashamed that I had stayed silent. I didn't want anyone to see me as a victim, and yet, that was exactly what I had become. But one night, after another fight that left me feeling completely broken, I realized I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't wait for things to change. Things weren't going to change. He wasn't going to change. He didn't want to change. And as long as I stayed, nothing would ever get better. That night, I packed a small bag. I took only the essentials, some clothes, my wallet, and Ethan's favorite toy. I didn't tell David I was leaving. I didn't have the strength to face him, to explain why. I just couldn't. I waited for him to fall asleep, and then I slipped out of the house with Ethan. The fear in my chest was overwhelming, but it was mixed with something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. The weight that had been on my shoulders for so long started to lift. I didn't know where I was going, But I knew I had to get away. I had to be free. We drove to a nearby shelter for women who had escaped domestic violence. I didn't know what to expect, but I was willing to do whatever it took to get away from him. The staff at the shelter were kind and understanding. They listened to my story without judgment and helped me find a place where I could stay, just for a little while. I remember sitting in the small, quiet room with Ethan that first night, staring out the window. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. For the first time in months, I felt safe. And for the first time in months, I realized something. I was free. But the journey was far from over. I had left David, but I hadn't left the fear, the shame, the doubts. I still had a long road ahead of me. But that night, in that small room, I made a vow to myself. I would never go back. I would rebuild my life, step by step, for me and for Ethan. The days that followed were difficult, filled with emotional battles and moments of doubt. I was living in a new reality, one that was unfamiliar and frightening. I had left David, but the psychological scars he left behind didn't just disappear. The fear lingered in my chest, and the questions about whether I had made the right decision kept swirling in my mind. What if I couldn't make it on my own? What if I wasn't strong enough? But there was something else in my heart too, a growing sense of hope. I had taken the first step toward freedom, toward building a life without fear. And with every passing day, the strength I thought I had lost was slowly starting to come back. The shelter became my safe space, a place where I could start to heal. I met other women who had walked similar paths, each with their own story of pain and survival. Listening to them, I realized I wasn't alone. There were others who understood. For the first time in years, I felt like I could talk openly about what had happened to me without fear of judgment or shame. But the hardest part wasn't just talking about the abuse. It was confronting the part of me that had allowed it to continue for so long. I had to face the truth. I had stayed because I was afraid of losing everything. I had stayed because I didn't believe I could survive without him. The abuse wasn't just physical. It had eroded my self-esteem, my sense of worth. It had convinced me that I wasn't capable of being happy, of being strong, without him. Therapy was a big part of my healing process. At first, I didn't know what to expect. I had never been the type of person to ask for help, to show vulnerability. But with each session, I began to see things differently. I started to understand that hearing the truth about my experiences, about the control, the manipulation, the gaslighting, was the first step in reclaiming my life. I learned that I wasn't weak for having stayed. I was human, and I had been trapped, isolated, and controlled. The most important thing I learned was that healing wasn't a straight path. It wasn't a matter of simply leaving and everything magically being okay. Healing takes time. It requires patience, and it requires self-compassion. I had to stop blaming myself for what had happened and start focusing on rebuilding myself. And then, there was Ethan. In the chaos of leaving, I had almost forgotten the toll it had taken on him. He was just a child, but he had witnessed things no one his age should ever see. I had shielded him as much as I could, but there was no escaping the tension, the fear that had permeated our home for so long. I could see the changes in him. He was more withdrawn, more anxious. The carefree joy he once had was gone, replaced by the weight of the trauma he had experienced. I knew that I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for him. He needed to see that we could recover, that we could build a better life, free from the shadow of fear. I began to take small steps to help him heal. We started talking more, doing activities together, anything that would bring back the lightness and joy that he had lost. It wasn't easy, but little by little, I saw him smile again. I saw him laugh again, and with every laugh, every smile, my heart healed a little more. Over time, I found a job that gave me a sense of purpose, and I started to feel like I was becoming the woman I used to be, the woman before the abuse. It wasn't easy. I was still scared at times, still haunted by the memories. But the more I worked, the more I focused on building a future for myself and for Ethan, the more I realized how strong I had become. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. It was about taking back the life that had been stolen from me and teaching Ethan that love should never be about fear or control. I wanted him to grow up knowing that love is safe, that it is built on respect, kindness, and trust. One night, as we were sitting in our small apartment, watching a movie together, Ethan turned to me and said, "Mom, I'm happy now." Those words meant more to me than anything else. It was a simple statement, but it was a statement of healing, of recovery, of love. It was proof that we had both survived. It was proof that we could move forward. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't know if I would ever find love again, if I would ever trust anyone the way I had trusted David. But I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer afraid. I had learned to trust myself again, and that was all I needed. The past no longer defined me. I wasn't the broken woman I had once been. I was a survivor, and with that came the strength to face whatever came next. And as for David, he no longer had any power over me. He was a part of my past, a past I was learning to let go of, step by step. Day by day, I had taken back my life, and there was nothing more powerful than that. As the months passed, life started to feel like it was moving forward again. But it wasn't easy. I was still haunted by the memories of what I had lived through, but they were no longer the defining force in my life. The pain had lessened, though it was still there in quiet moments when I allowed myself to reflect. I knew I would never forget, but I also knew that my past didn't have to control my future. Ethan had changed too. He was more confident now. His smile was genuine, and he was no longer looking over his shoulder in fear. I had done everything I could to shield him from the scars of his father's actions, but some things were impossible to protect him from. He had seen enough to know what pain looked like, but he had also learned what it felt like to be loved, truly loved, without fear. I knew that I had to be the one to show him that, even after everything, there was still hope. The healing process wasn't a straight line. There were days when the weight of everything would come crashing down, and I would wonder if I had made the right choice. There were moments when I would question my decisions, question my ability to protect Ethan, and wonder if I had missed something, some warning sign that would have prevented all of this from happening. But then I would look at Ethan, and I would see the spark in his eyes that had been missing for so long. I would see the way he was learning to trust again, to laugh without fear, to love without boundaries. And in those moments, I realized that the decision to leave had been the best decision I had ever made. I had found myself again. I had found the strength I didn't know I had. I had learned that I was worthy of love that was safe. Love that didn't come with strings attached. Love that didn't demand my silence or my submission. I had learned that I was enough, and that was the most powerful realization of all. The day I signed the divorce papers was one of the hardest days of my life. But as I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about ending the fear, ending the control, ending the lies that had kept me captive for so long. It was the beginning of my true freedom. I didn't rush into another relationship. I wasn't looking for someone to fix me. I wasn't interested in finding another man to fill the void that had been left by David. Instead, I focused on myself, on rebuilding the life I had lost, on regaining the confidence I had once had. I focused on Ethan, on creating a home where he could feel safe, loved, and free from the trauma of the past. And then, One day, as I sat on the couch with Ethan, watching the sun set, he turned to me and said something that made my heart swell with pride. "Mom, I'm proud of you." In that moment, I realized that I had won. I had survived. We had survived. We had escaped the shadow of abuse, and we had rebuilt our lives from the ashes. And in doing so, we had found a new beginning. A beginning filled with love, hope, and possibility. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I would face it head-on, with strength, with courage, and with the knowledge that I had the power to shape my own destiny. The man I had married no longer had any control over me. His power was gone. He no longer defined who I was, or who Ethan was. We were free, and that, in itself, was the most beautiful thing of all.